Greetings, my friends. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Grit and Equity Talks podcast with yours truly, Dr. E28. I'm thrilled to be here with you today. I've been enjoying myself at the camp conference here in Houston, and we are doing what we need to do to connect and bridge the gap and help each other out. So, with that said, I do want to go right into some announcements with you. First things first, the Grit and Equity Talks podcast. It will be featured on the X Factor EDU network hosted by Dr. Matthew Joseph. And it also can be found on Spotify and all of my social media channels. I also want to remind you guys to check out my website at www.india-white.com for books, blogs, and to schedule me for your next speaking or coaching event. In addition to that, I wanted to remind you to follow me when you get a chance on social media. My Facebook is Miss India White. LinkedIn is The India White. Twitter is Indie Speak and Teach. Instagram is Indie238. YouTube is India White 123. And TikTok is Dr. India White. I want to appreciate all of you guys for your following and for your support. It means the world to me. It really does. And I also wanted to remind you of some upcoming events. I'm already here at Camp Conference with many of you guys here in Texas. I'll be in California at the Silicon Valley Conference, helping out there as a speaker. I'll be at the NCSM conference and NCTM conferences in September. I'll be at ICTM conference in Iowa in October, OCTM, also ATMNE in October, as well as Nebraska's conference and also the Northwest Conference. So there are many chances for us to connect. Thank you to everyone that has allowed me to speak on your platforms and that have partnered with me in your school districts. I'm looking forward to doing great work with you in the future as well. I also wanted to remind you to please check out my Grit workshop whenever you get a chance on the Grassroots Workshops website. I think it's probably one of the only sessions on grit. So you could just type in grit and search and you should find it there. But the title of it is How to Harness Grit to Help Students Thrive. And just to remind you again, this podcast is if you're trying to close the achievement gap, but you're having classroom management issues, or if your students just aren't motivated to do the work, then you can join me here on the Grit and Equity Talks podcast, and we will figure out some solutions together. Now, speaking of that, I do want to talk in this session about something very important to all of us, and that is going to be building grit. And so the reason why I wanted to come in here and speak about building grit is because there's been so much flack about what is grit and, is it needed? Let's make sense of it. Let's make it tangible. And so when you build grit, it's more than just telling somebody to try hard. It's an actual process. And so my formula, with having great resilience and time, it really kind of helps to guide that for whoever, whether it's a student or a teacher or an administrator. And so it's imperative that we do what we can to give people the tools necessary to build grit. So if you're in a classroom setting and you're teaching math or whatnot, in order to build grit, you cannot just tell a student to try hard if you have not first built the ground for them to be set up for success. So first things first is you really have to make sure you've laid down the groundwork for your students to make sure that they're proficient in the content. And then afterwards, you can start working on their process of building grit for themselves. The thing I love about it is you go from just building grit and having okay, yeah, you're doing good, for this one particular assignment, to then the student starts developing their trait of grit. And then it starts to take over to where now, it's just a habit. And I do want to shout out some students and that I've been honored to rub shoulders with. One made a post on Facebook and he's like, I'm using grit to get up at 5 a.m. to work on this assignment. And he's knocking it out. And that's what it's all about. Is he didn't just get there overnight. He didn't just wake up and say, I'm just going to be gritty today. No, it was a process for him. And so it's a process for our students. and also for educators. Educators, I'm going to say this, it's very tempting to get into a rut and into a slump and feel like you have so much coming at you from the district office, from just your everyday reminders that are coming from administrators, right? And it can feel a little bit cumbersome. It feels like us versus them. But in order to evolve and to grow from that, you have to understand your grit levels and how to build grit. What is it going to take for you to be passionate about your content area and about the students that you're teaching? Can you spice it up? Can you do a project to, space things out and to make things, to have a new approach? What can you do to build grit for you as an educator? Because if you don't start out with grit, if you start your day, slugging in after going to Dunkin' and getting your sweet tea, whatever, and now you're just tired and burned out before you even got to second period, that's going to rub off onto your students. So, what can you do as an educator to build your resilience and to also make sure that you are being proactive about utilizing your time management effectively? You're going to have to figure out your system, your way of work. And that's why I talk about my system of great resilience and time to really understand what grit is and how to build it. So, with that said, I want to go into an article that I found for us. Marley's fingerprint for success. Uh, Always giving shout out to those that write things and whatnot. Pet peeve of mine is copyright stuff. Okay, so how to develop grit and the one critical ingredient that makes it work. So she says here, if you've dabbed in researching the word grit in the past decade or so, you've likely stumbled across Angela Duckworth's book at the same time. Duckworth is the founder and CEO of Character Lab, which is a nonprofit whose mission is to advance scientific insights that help children thrive. She is also a Chris Brown Distinguished Professor of Psychology at the University of Pennsylvania. Okay. And she's a faculty or co-director of Penn Wharton Behavior Change for Good Initiative. Okay. So in short, very accomplished, and she knows a lot about grit. She's a rock star. She's not been canceled. So that's excellent. All right. So, but what exactly is grit? Duckworth has defined it mostly along these lines: passion and sustained perseverance applied towards long term achievement with no particular concern for rewards or recognition along the way. So I will say this: I will say that my understanding of grit and what Duckworth said is that grit is actually having the passion and perseverance to obtain a long term goal. Now, this author just said that it's not tied to a reward, but I will say this: sometimes it is tied to a reward. For instance, if I told you that if you, as an educator, you're teaching all of your students, if every one of your students performs at an 80% or higher on standardized tests in your class and whatnot, then I'm going to give you a $50,000 cash reward. I think that that is a reward and it is a goal that you're going to strive to meet. It is not always, tied to reward. So what happens is, yes, I do believe that grit can be cultivated by short-term goals. And some of those goals can be rewards that then lead to a long-term goal of your ultimate career, ultimate success, ultimate mastery of something. And that is a give or take. It doesn't necessarily mean it. So that's one part of that article that I think, hey, we can agree to disagree. I think it really can be tied to a reward. And sometimes people are like, oh, but you don't need extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. You just need intrinsic. Well, sometimes you do need extrinsic as well to get started towards the path of intrinsic motivation. So, all right, let's keep going. Combines resilience, ambition, and self-control in the pursuit of goals that takes months, years, or even decades. The origin story of her work with the concept actually revolves around the idea that her father used to tell her, "You're no genius," and she overcame, wow, and became successful with principles of grit. She also has a grit scale on her website. Okay. Since the initial publication of Grit, there's been some pushback on her ideas. Um, Iowa State said that there's no indication that Grit improves performance, right? They said that it was based on an analysis of 88 independent studies involving 67,000 people, and that the idea of Grit is similar to um, consciousness, and while important, not a predictor of success or performance. In fact, if defining around academic performance, factors such as adjustment, study habits, anxiety, and class attendance are far more related to performance than grit. So, with that said, there is one more fork in the road on defining grit. So, Duckworth defines it as almost an intersection of perseverance and passion, right? And then they talk about how there were business school professors that found that measurements of grit over focused on perseverance and under focused on passion. And then it says here in another meta-analysis. So we've got to clarify: um, is grit reliable or not? So here we go. In another meta-analysis of 127 studies and 2 field studies, those authors found that grit does not necessarily exist without passion. I can agree with that. It says they even noted that perseverance without passion is mere drudgery, right? And so it keeps going here. It says these pushbacks caused Duckworth to do a new research, which she released. So she's like, okay, let's see what's going on. So she did some more research. So she now focused on 11,000 West Point cadets. In that study, it concluded the cognitive ability predicts the academic success, while grit and physical capacity helped cadets stick around until graduation. So basically what they're saying here is that grit in itself is not the only factor that attributes to success. It is to be combined with other factors. However, it is a factor. So it does not stand alone. It has to be combined with other factors. And that actually backs up my study as well at the University of Florida, when I was looking to see why students would persist in school versus others that didn't. And so let's keep going. So it says, this work shows us that grit is not the only determinant, there you go, factor of success. It says, yes, but it's very important, right? And it helps people to stick with things that, when they're hard, but it's not the best predictor of every aspect of success, but it is still a factor. Okay. And it says, if you want to lead a healthy, helpful life, you can focus on honesty, kindness, generosity, and grit. And I think it's beautiful that they talked about honesty, because I think that the path towards passion is to be honest about where you are as a leader, for students to be honest about where they are and why they have passion, why they don't have passion, what's going to cultivate their grit levels, and beyond, what's going to help them be successful. We have to be more passionate and honest about where we stand and where they stand. And then once we're able to be honest, we're able to, go beyond those surface level facades and things and really start to dig into the work. So let's keep going. So it says, the above is the grit landscape. We know about it, who's working on it, and how to define it. But now we need to investigate now is how a team lead could foster more grit with their employees, or where their focus should lie in terms of developing both grit and team motivation. So grit and the team leader. So it says grit for her work, Duckworth's work, her new work, they underscore that there's no single magic bullet for success and performance, right? It's a mix of factors, right? And so managers should be responsible to attempt to cultivate all of these mix of factors. So courage is one. So it talks about having an element of grit, okay? And then it says this is because it shows someone how to, it says because for someone to show how passion and perseverance is on a project, this takes courageous, bold leaps, right? And then it also challenges the authority to become the best possible outcome, to have the best possible outcome. And so how can you foster more courage? So they're giving us some pointers here. Reward and acknowledge those team members who did difficult things. You can create a courage board, right? And then they're talking about curiosity. So this is another thing. How can you foster curiosity? So if you're wanting to build grit, you're going to, increase courage. You'll also foster curiosity. They're doing curiosity day or coffee talk. Um, Reward the curiosity. So if somebody is doing a project, like it says here, you can reward them for being curious. And then honesty is another trait that goes along with building grit. Okay. Honesty, right? So it says be honest about the challenges at your level. What are you facing? What are you being pressured about? What information does the team need from your level in order to do their job more effectively? Okay. And then it says we've talked about transparency in business for the last 10 to 20 years, but many companies still operate on a proprietary level. Um, and then it says, where knowledge is free and challenges are discussed honestly, with that knowledge out there, you'd be often surprised where the new and best ideas come from. So, very interesting. Back to grit and passion. How can leaders develop passion in their team? And this can be a principal, this can be a teacher, this can be, someone that, just every day, corporate, whatever. So it's talking about it how, you know, what you want to do is it says to create passion on your team, you need to have the right people in the right seats. Okay, so it says if one person enjoys coding reports and finding new way to approach that task, but another one despises that task and consistently delays it in their to-do list, it stands to reason that the person who loves it should be doing it. Um, Work should, within reason, be channeled towards a passion. Okay, and then it says, because basically, if not, it's going to begin to turn over, and that's definitely not something we want. So it's saying to have the right people in the right seats. But sometimes, like when you're in the classroom, you have students in those seats, and those students are given to you. You cannot just say, "Oh, okay, well, it's just my assumption. These students are more passionate, so I'm going to give it all to these students and not to the other students." You still have to teach all of your students. So, in order to really cultivate grit in those students, you're going to have to work on building their grit levels and their passion. And I'm going to be honest, if you're wanting the right students in the right seats, they're already in the right seats. So what you have to do is cultivate their passion. That first is going to happen through relationship building, getting to know your students, getting to know what they're passionate about, being interested in them, and then being intentional at making sure that you're making instruction relevant for them so that they want to come back to your class and they feel safe and they feel like they trust you, like you want them to win. There's nothing worse than sitting in a class or being among people that you do business with or whatever, and there's just this fear, this feeling that they don't want you to win. They don't want you to do your best. And it's so funny when we do want people to win, we open up all kinds of doors for them. We give them all types of opportunities, all types of ideas, and we do the same for our students that we really click with. We just gravitate towards those kids. We really check on them, make sure that they're persistent, make sure that they're going to be well, versus the kids that we might not know or that we don't really have a stronger relationship with. And there's like this distance, and we can like ice those kids out or treat those kids like, like they're a problem, or like I just got to get rid of them because, the vibe is off. And so I just can't be fooling me as a educator unless I get rid of that kid. So I'm going to send that kid to the office instead of trying to, overcome that and get out of our comfort zones and see what we can do to really connect with students, and stop patting ourselves on the back because the same old kids keep passing. We need to really start challenging ourselves in the education space to see how we can um, build grit in students that are completely different from us, that the vibe is off and there's a wall up and we don't know how to break that wall down. It's going to definitely take relationship building for sure. So let's get back to the article and see what they have to say to us. As a leader, you can also define passion around the bigger picture of the organization. So it's talking about John Deere is a good example of this. So he says that he wants to stay ahead and keep the turnover down. And so the passion tactic that he has was introduced around onboarding. So, before they were ever patented 175 years ago, the manager comes in and explain what the plow is, the history of John Deere, right? That's on day one. starts at a very high level in very early work. That work is important. Okay, but then they're talking about other small concepts. So asking team members what they're, there you go, interested in outside of your core products and services, allowing them to design products. So now you're giving that input, that their voice, you're enhancing their voice. And we should do the same in classrooms. We should enhance student voices when we have opportunities to. It says here, then if they meet specific targets, allow them to take 1 day off per month. So they're now getting a reward, kind of, right? And then they can pursue a passion project. Look at this, appreciate and recognize team members. I think we just need more of that across the board, more celebration, more appreciation, more love and support for people. And then it says that's when you're going to start seeing different elements of grit overlap. So we're talking about appreciation, recognition, transparency, and passion. Remember, without passion, grit isn't there. But there's also a bigger picture around how employees develop a role and in an organization. And it's not just one or two inputs either. The passionate employee can still not resonate with the team or business, unfortunately. So there are many inputs into what drives both the individual and the team performance. So now they're saying gritty, passionate employees make a successful team. So if you're wanting your teachers, for instance, in the world of education, to be amazing, you've got to work on the grit levels and the passionate levels. So, now they're talking here. So the concept of grit, it involves all these sub elements of grit, such as curiosity, honesty, courage, follow through, adaptation after failure. That's huge. I would say out of all of these two, follow through and adaptation after failure are key. And I'm going to take that and ask a question. How do we follow through with students when they didn't do well on a test, they didn't pass a test? And how do we help them to adapt? How do we do that and do it in a way that keeps them passionate and plugged in and wanting to come back? And then how do we do that as educators? Maybe we gave an exam and students didn't do as well. How do we adapt and to come back with that much more passion and to reset and start over? Those are some things that we definitely want to think about, like as we're trying to cultivate grit and build grit in students and in ourselves as educators. So, I hope that you guys are able to glean something from this. It's imperative that, whatever we do, that we don't just settle for, less and say, oh, well, just make these assumptions that it's always this way and it's not going to change with these type of students or with this particular situation I'm dealing with. You never know what can happen. I want to encourage all of you to continue to do your best, continue to build your grit. Find out why you're interested in education, why you're interested, why are you passionate, what is your objective, why are you trying to make a purpose in the lives of, a change, a difference in the lives of the students that you're servicing. What do you get out of it? Work on that, reflect on that, so that you can take that into the next school year. So with that said, thanks so much, guys, for joining me on the Grit and Equity Talks podcast with yours truly, Dr. India White. I do want to remind you again of some announcements. Things first, the Grit and Equity Talks podcast with Dr. India White will be featured on X Factor EDU, hosted by Dr. Matthew Joseph, and it can be found on Spotify. I also wanted to remind you to check out the website, www.india-white.com, for books, blogs, and to schedule me for an event. Then also the social media is Facebook is Miss India White, LinkedIn is The India White, Twitter is Indie Speak and Teach, Instagram is Indie238, YouTube is India White 123, and TikTok is Dr. India White. Upcoming events, I'm wrapping up camp here, and then I'll have NCSM, NCTM, ICTM, OCTM, ATM, and E, the Northwest Math Conference, and then, of course, some things on the West Coast. Please check out the Grassroots Mini Workshop, where you could find that on the Grassroots Workshops website. It's the one on grit, and it would be a good tool for PLCs and, some other things for you. And so, again, I appreciate you guys coming. Again, this podcast is, if you're trying to close the achievement gap, we want to focus on grit. If you're having classroom management issues, we want to focus on grit. So thank you so much for joining me again on the Grit and Equity Talks podcast. And until next time, stay gritty. See ya.